All right, so I created a backdrop behind all my pyro nodes. And now we're going to take a look at the helicopter itself. So it's called Heli Explosion. So it is an RBD simulation of the helicopter falling apart, breaking apart. Pieces are hitting the ground. And yeah, this particular render is made of different AOVs, as I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at that contact sheet, connect that here, double click, show your layer names, and let's hit one. So we have a number of different kinds of things we can play around with. So we have a combined diffuse, direct diffuse, combined glossy reflection for all the reflective areas of our helicopter here, and some indirect passes. So we don't have the we don't have all the possible AOVs in this render. Would make a very bloated file, but we have the essential. This is not a exact lighting that we should be getting. We don't have the HDRI, but we chose not to spend a huge amount of time lighting this helicopter. We lit it just so that it actually works as an exercise. But typically, we would try to spend more time on refining and perfecting the lighting so that out of the box, we get something that is maybe a little bit closer to where we want it to be. However, this is good enough for as an exercise. And in fact, the fact that it's not this lighting is not super accurate gives us an opportunity to look at how to use AOVs and comp to try to bring it a little bit closer to where we want that render to be. So we have a number of AOVs which we'll be working with. But the first thing that we want to do is to get a sense of what the helicopter looks like if we just basically layer it over everything else. So if you remember, I did mention earlier that we are going to apply the lens distortion to everything at some point. So right now, I just put the pyro over the plate. There's no lens distortion just yet. So what we can do now is create a merge node between the pyro and our helicopter, and then preview what the result is going to be. We still haven't, let's bring the over, bring all of that together here, and let's take a look at what everything looks like if we're to combine our helicopter with what we've done earlier. Okay, so the helicopter, it kind of suffers from the same issues that we saw earlier in one of the and some of the render passes, some of the pyro. The blacks are very dense. Generally speaking, I feel that maybe if you look at the building, it's fairly bright here. We have some, pretty strong light. And I just feel like maybe the top of the helicopter, given the material that it's made of, how the paint, etc., we can try to maybe balance this into the plate a little bit better. And for that, we'll just use a grade node. And this grade node is going to do some very simple things. So we can get rid of the contact sheet here, we'll add a grade node, unpromote by alpha. And in this grade node, we are going to the brightness of our little friend here down a little bit and see what this would look like. So I'll just bring the gain down to about 0.75. Make it a little bit darker, and let's see what it looked like before. Okay. So we bring it down overall, but I think the broad specular that we have on top, we might tweak that to a brighter value a little bit later. I think we can try to lift overall the entire. Let's go and expose the values for the lift here. I'll click on 4. I'm going to try to lift things overall, obviously not to this level, maybe something like that. So it's red, it's making things a little bit more red overall. We'll do the same thing here. I'll copy paste these values in green, but bring them down maybe a little bit. So that's making things a little bit too green. But then what happens if I go 0.08, very, very little? So it's kind of making it feel a bit closer to this olive green color. It might be a little bit too green, so we can bring this down a little bit. But just by doing this very simple operation here, I turn it off and on, you can see that it's looking overall a little bit dustier, more plausible in terms of color response. So for now, that's fine. I might adjust this, and probably will adjust this a little bit later. What happens if we overall offset everything? You see, not to this amount. See, a tiny, tiny bit, just a little bit to make sure that the blacks are not so strong. Just a little bit lifting the blacks or lifting the entire image a little bit, offsetting the image a little bit, just like so. So again, let's take a look before and after. And I'm pressing D for deactivate on my keyboard on the grade node here. Okay, so it's pretty much in that ballpark. The sharpness of the helicopter might be a little bit too high. We can just simply apply a 1 or 2 pixel blur just to kind of get it into the level of sharpness that we see in the plate. Again, this is an analog process. This is shooting on film. Here we have something that is exceedingly sharp coming from the render. So we can just apply a tiny amount of blur. It's not really a defocus. It's just softening the image a little bit. 1 pixel blur, or maybe 2, or maybe in between. 2 might be a little bit too much, so let's go with 1. And we have something that sits a little bit better overall. That's not everything. I'm thinking we can try to ping the top of the helicopter a little bit stronger, making it respond to the light a little bit more. And for that, we'll be using the utility pass, and in particular, the normal pass that we have in that came from the render as well. So we're going to be using this. So how does that work? The red, green, and blue are storing where the geometry, the surface is pointing relative to the camera, or actually relative to the geometry itself. And we can use this information to create a mask, which we can then use to color correct very specific areas of our helicopter. So for this, we're going to bring in a gizmo. A gizmo is a bit of a, think of it as a node which contains more nodes inside. So it's a simplified mini script, if you like. And we're going to bring it in. It's actually part of the BHK start folder. And let's import the comp nodes here. So file, import comp nodes. I'll do this again. File, so insert comp nodes, sorry. And we're going to navigate to our BHK10 directory. And inside the comp, we have directory, we have another file called BHK gizmos. So I would like you guys to import that. And when you do, you have 3 gizmos that we'll be using to modify a few things here, but that we'll be using in the script later on as well. So first, we're going to use the relight node. Relight node. This is something that came from the Nukepedia website. It's a gizmo that some of you may have used in the past. And this relight, so we can just copy it and paste it here. I'm going to connect this image input to our utility pass. And inside of that node, we double click here, we're going to use the N AOV as the source. And the way this works, you can change the angle in X and also in elevation, get this kind of rotating light around our 3D object. And we can use this as a mask, as a channel to use to do additional color correction on top of our helicopter. So this feature here has two components. You can spit out a diffuse or specular, not very shiny. Specular is a little bit more kind of what we want. So we'll spit a specular response out from this normals, and we're going to go to an angle about minus 120. Kind of gives us the general sense of lighting coming from the top, and maybe here something like 90 degrees. Once we have that, we can use the anti-alias switch to get a bit of a better response. You can see here, if I zoom in with that turned on, we get slightly better quality. So we'll leave that on. And now that we have this mask, I don't want to simply grade the entirety of the helicopter with this mask. What I want to do is grade a particular AOV in my helicopter with this mask. So let's take a look again at the different AOVs that we have to play with. We have a combined diffuse, so we could potentially use that. But we also have some kind of glassy reflective material, which doesn't seem to react very well to, as I mentioned, the HDRI that we used has a particular kind of blueness to it. I would like this glass, this area here, to be maybe more reactive to the 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock lighting direction that we see coming in from our plate and also on our helicopter. So what I'll do now is I'll use an AOV grade node. So we'll copy that, and we will put it right below the relight. So the relight is a mask that we'll use, right? The grade AOV is a color grading operation that will perform only on one of the AOVs. So we'll connect that to our graded or pre-graded helicopter. Inside of this AOV node, what we want to grade is the combined glossy reflection AOV. Connect this to the mask. The mask comes from the relight. And what we'll be grading is this little guy right here. So we make that choice by pulling in the channel to use here, combine glossy reflection. And now if I look at the result here, right, if I was to make any changes here, I'm only affecting just the glass, which is exactly what I want to do. So let's see what happens if I make this much more brighter here. I lower the white point a little bit, something like that. Maybe that's too much, but let's see. And in my gain here, I'll just make this maybe a little bit redder, a bit greener, possibly. Maybe that's too green. So anyway, we can play around with, what the color of that stuff is, how much of a redness or yellowness that we are reflecting in the glass. So that gives me slightly better or perceive the glass a little bit more. Unfortunately, we also have some other areas that are being affected a little bit too much. So we could cut that with another mask that takes care of all the brightness, and we can do this in the next step. But for now, I will just take this result, RGB values that I see here, and that is going to become my new helicopter that I'm going to use. We're going to layer that into the onto the plate. Now, if I take a look at the alpha channel here, right at the tail end of the grade AOD, our alpha channel is completely solid. So what we'll do is we'll copy the red, green, and blue values into the rest of the stream, right, which has the correct alpha channel, but we'll just use the RGB of that and the alpha of that. We'll just use a copy node, and the A is going to be here, the B is going to be there. All we'll need to do is layer copy. We'll set that to RGB, and we'll just turn off the alpha here and here. We're taking the RGB from the A input and injecting it back into what we have here, which has a correct alpha channel, and taking the RGB from that and combining both. So now we have the RGB being the corrected version here, and the alpha being the original alpha that we have from the mainstream here. Perfect. We made the glass a little bit brighter, but we don't necessarily want to affect all the other already bright areas. So for that, actually go and make sure that in our AOV grade node, that we are in fact using the mask that we created from the normal spas as a mask in our operation here. So here we have mask none. We're going to select that to RGB.alpha. And the effect of that is we have the glass on top of the helicopter being a little bit more visible. So what we need to do to make sure that this transformation, this color correction applies to the front of the glass, we can change a little bit of the angle here of our normal spas. You can see this here. We can change it to the point where we're starting to see more of the front of the helicopter being more visible here. So we have, if we take a look at what we have before and after, but this may not be enough. So what we can also do is we can try to change the value, the brightening that we see here in the glass, in that correction, just to make it a little bit more apparent. And we can, mess around a little bit better with the normal spas or the normals matte that's coming from the, just to get that to read a little bit better. So in doing that, we're not really affecting the rest of our helicopter that much. We're just affecting the areas that we want, which is mostly the front here. Okay. We can then re-inject this RGB back into our mainstream here, which is this particular area, this particular block of nodes. And we have something that has more of a glassy or brighter glass reflection